All right, so we're here with Island Sound and Story once again. We're in Esquimalt today, and we're talking to Tasha about her art practice, but more specifically about lichens, which you use for both art and just kind of learning about and teaching other people about. Um, so I guess for how did you get into them is the first question.
It's a really good question. It's sort of hard to pinpoint like an exact moment or time or reason, but if I think back maybe 2012, 2011, I was really into ethnobotany,
Hmm.
learning about the different indigenous uses of plants and mushrooms.
Yeah.
And I was learning about identifying some things and I noticed, usnea, which is like a beautiful lichen that kind of drapes on the trees sometimes. That was the first kind of intro into really looking at them closely.
So usnea, certain type of lichen, you became interested in its uses, interested in the way that it looked, the way that it
Yeah,
draped and hung,
exactly.
and then so it was that lichen, and then the interest just expanded more broadly to the whole category. What turned it from this is cool into lichen as a topic
Right.
is what I'm interested in.
Totally. So the usnea being gorgeous, looking hair-like, being quite sculptural, really inspired me artistically.
Mhm.
And for quite a few years, I would gather salvaged usnea. So when I say salvaged, I mean like a branch falls in a windstorm uh, on the road or the sidewalk, and it's covered in usnea, and it won't survive on the ground. So I'll pick it off the branch and collect it, and then
So it has to be on a living tree or up in the air
yeah.
to
So
to make it.
it's not actually needing to be on a living tree. Usnea, like most lichens, have a very specific um, microclimate,
Mm.
micro environment that they've adapted to. So sunshine, airflow, the amount of water vapor that they can absorb, and maybe on the ground they'll just get too much rain. They'll get too saturated,
Yeah, because
and
they're there. It's not falling past them and through them. It's collecting around them. That kind of thing.
totally. So in the case of usnea, um, you could argue that anything decomposing into the soil is helping the environment, but I thought it was at that point a pretty neutral intervention in the ecosystem to just sort of gather the usnea. And then I started making wigs
Yeah,
and I started making merkins, which are traditionally
downstairs wigs we could
exactly.
call them.
Thank you.
But it because it's hair like, you thought this is I can kind of do art with it and kind of play with this idea of nature's hair versus human hair was kind of the
Exactly.
idea.
And like kind of unifying humans with nature
Hmm.
to sort
Yeah.
of remind people that we are nature, we're part of nature. And when I was working with the usnea, I had to select very particularly textured pieces, also pieces that didn't have a lot of discoloration. And I found I had quite a bit left over,
Mm.
and as I was getting to know the lichens better, which I think is really important if you're using natural materials to kind of really research and learn about, what you're working with
Yeah.
or who you're working with. If you are looking at these creatures as beings and respecting, their needs and how to interact in an ethical way. And so, yeah, I found out through my research that traditionally all over the world, lichens have been used for dyes.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then I found out that very specific species will make specific colors.
Okay. Yeah.
And so then that's when I started to get into, well, how do I determine which species I have? How do I identify each lichen? And then I kind of really got into lichen identification and understanding the ecology and how to ethically collect them. And it kind of got a little out of control from there.
Yeah. So it was because it started out as practically, I want to in a responsible way and an effective way to know what actual colors I'm gonna get, know a bit more about these lichens, and use them for dyes and things. And the amount of knowledge you needed in order to do that properly opened that world a little bit more.
Totally, totally. So part of learning about how to identify which lichens I had for dye purposes, or even just understanding how to ethically gather them, depending on what species it was, um, involved, learning how to ID them. And one of the things I started with was like a little hand lens.
So that's like a magnifying glass.
Yeah.
You might have it in your pocket or on a chain around your neck.
Yeah, usually
really,
on the neck. Yeah.
like pull it up and inspect, because they're so small. The details of them, like you might see lichen on a rock, but to see what structures it has, what components, right? You need to really
Yeah.
get in there often.
Exactly. Yeah. And I bought my first lichen ID book.
Oh yeah.
By the wonderful lichenologists Linda Geiser and Bruce McCoon. Really great lichenologist folks. And yeah, with that book and my hand lens, and of course the internet, but mostly the book, because you'd be surprised that there's really not that many. There are quite a few good resources on the internet for lichens, but not as many as a lot of other creatures. And there's nothing quite like an old-fashioned ID book, bringing it out in the field and
having your you feel the part, I would think, with your hand lens and your book of details.
Totally. And it's funny you mentioned that, because that aspect of it inspired another artistic element, which was like almost an element of performance art in embodying this like field biologist, field botanist type persona. And I kind of started integrating that into some of my projects, where I had a project. I decided I wanted to try to understand the, how do I say this? Maybe the sound of a lichen. Now, lichens don't.
Sound of a lichen.
Yeah.
It's not a very active type of being.
Exactly.
It kind of sits on the rock or the branch. But what kind of a sound could it make?
Right. And so I was experimenting with this, and I was also kind of at the same time able to go into a lichenologist's lab and do some chemical analysis of lichens.
Oh, yeah.
And we created a data set that was like visual dots. And my friend was like, hey, that looks kind of like a sound map. And then I was like, oh, and they're like, hey, maybe you could do something with sound with lichens. So I actually got a Canada Council grant to do the project where I sampled lichens in different ecosystems around the South Island. And I put them through this chemical process, created a visual mapping of their chemistry.
Okay.
And then used those patterns to sort of sonify a melody. And then I took sounds from the environment and put them in there too. And then I was trying to make lichens make sounds. And the only way I could do it was like moving them, like rustling them. Or when you spray a lichen, it moves and it kind of bumps up against the other lichens. So I have
it recoils from a spray of water, or
absorbs the water.
Okay, yeah.
And through the absorption, its shape changes a bit.
Yeah, and so relative to its neighbors or its other kind of partners, part of it will occupy a different space.
Yeah.
And so through that movement, you're getting sound?
A little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I had these bags of salvaged lichens that I actually got from a logging area. And I made some kind of crackling sounds that were basically lichens moving.
Yeah, and expanding or drying out. Or
exactly.
That kind of thing.
So, and then I kind of mixed that in with the other elements of the soundscape.
Yeah.
So that whole process, I was like, well, when I'm out in the field collecting the lichens and doing all this, collection of sound, maybe it would be interesting to, like dress in my field clothes. Yeah. And I got a fishing vest and I kind of really played up that sort of field botanist part and did some,
kind of your wild thornberries style, like.
And then that kind of, I don't know, I started kind of enjoying the hamming it up aspect of kind of nerding out on lichens. And then I was also like this whole time really inspired by just what I'm learning about lichens and how amazing they are
Mhm.
in their, you know, they kind of subvert the binary classification that Western science puts on the natural world
Yeah.
through, you know, what categories it's in.
Because they're a compilation almost of a few different things.
Exactly. So lichens are a mutually symbiotic organism of multiple organisms actually that come together to create the lichen. And some people might say that, oh, it's just fungus with algae. And that makes sense because the lichen's taxonomic names are actually based on just the fungus's name itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, they're not like the name of the lichen isn't really considering the whole package. And yeah, which is a little unfortunate. So some people prefer to use the common names. Like for instance, Usnea, common name is old man's beard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so Usnea is the genus. There's a lot of Usnea species out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I really like the fact that lichens kind of don't really fit into like one category. They're not only fungus, they're not only a plant. Like they're not a plant, they're a lichen, and it's because all of these beings are coming together to create something that's more than the sum of its parts.
And so that's fungus, cyanobacteria,
yep,
and
algae. But it's not always both the cyanobacteria and the algae.
Could be one or the other.
It could be one or the other, or it could be both. Basically, the fungus needs a photobiont to create energy from the sun, and in turn, the fungus keeps the photobiont safe from drying out or
provides a kind of a home for it to, or a body kind of for it to inhabit.
Exactly. And I think in like 2016 or 2017, some reachers, one being Toby Scribble or Scribbly, I'm not sure. Sorry, Toby.
Okay, sorry, Toby.
But he and his team, I'm pretty sure it was his team in the University of Alberta who found that every lichen that they tested actually also contained a yeast.
Oh.
So it's not just the fungus that creates the structure of the lichen, but there's also other fungi in yeast form living in or on, I'm not sure exactly what part of the lichen they're in, but yeah, so it really is this like collection, this sort of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that really inspired me as someone who, you know, grew up in a very capitalist, you know, individualist oriented culture to kind of rethink how to be in the world. Should I talk about the little group that I've started?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess it started with me learning so many things about lichens and lichen identification. I kind of felt like, well, there's not a whole lot of lichen identification opportunities for the public. So I started doing some workshops here and there, and that was great. But I really enjoyed, I think I forget when it was, but I just sort of did a free workshop at one point, and there was something really like liberating about not having the pressure of having money involved, and it just being a bunch of people getting together and learning about lichens and
not needing to be kind of the primary expert.
Exactly.
Right?
And so I had this idea, and actually I want to like kind of mention my friend Heather, who's a lichenologist, and they were like, hey, or no, what did they say? They kept on using the term lichen cult, and I had kind of thought of it as a cult too, because lichenologists are just so keen on lichens.
Yeah.
And there's not that many lichenologists. And anyway, they'd been using the term lichen cult, and I'd been thinking of it that way. And then I was like, I kind of want to start a lichen cult, not like a real cult, but basically a group.
Well, almost like you kind of put on the trappings of the field naturalist or the botanist with the fishing vest and kind of all the character. This became kind of your new kind of character to lean into, right?
Exactly.
Like, this is what I'm doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I basically asked the lichen specialists who I know who live in the area. And it was like, hey, when are you available? I found a day that we were all available. And then I just put on Instagram, like, all right, we're going to do a free lichen walk. And I'd already started the account Lichen Cult, because I was like, okay, I've just got to make sure that I get the Lichen Cult account before anyone else does. And then it kind of like, I was like, oh, great, this is perfect. That's where I'll do the lichen walks. And yeah, and then basically the first Lichen Cult walk, I had 3 people there helping me kind of answer questions and sort of co-facilitate.
Other people who know a bit about it,
and they know a lot. Yeah, I'm really excited about like where it's going. I even made some like cult paraphernalia, cult brochures
to hand out and recruit.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you gotta really go all in.
Get the good word out.
Totally.
Yeah.
I actually I was given a small grant to do a performance art piece in Vancouver at the beginning of July.
Oh yeah.
And I actually fully dressed
Became
up
the cult
in
leader.
a cult leader outfit and had a little wheeling stand of brochures, and I was trying to get people on the street to join my lichen cult. Yeah. But there were some people who were really into talking about lichens, and that was super fun. But most people were like, oh, like, get away from me.
It's a cult. Were you using one of your lichen wigs that you made?
Yes.
And dyed as your kind of look?
Yes. I thought, I have this amazingly kind of over-the-top lichen wig, and I might as well use it, might as well wear it. But
and
it
so
actually,
it was kind of greeny?
Well, it actually, I didn't dye it. It was sort of a straw color, and that's because I made the wig back in 2017.
Oh, yeah. It's a little while ago now.
And the algae had died. So with usnea, because it needs a very specific environment to thrive, you know, I salvaged it, of course. I need to mention that. But yeah, having it inside, indoors for years, the green, the nice kind of minty green color sort of faded away, and all that's left is just the fungus. So the lichen keeps its shape when it's indoors and drying out.
But it's not photosynthesizing, it's not living, it's not the green of taking in sunlight and turning it into... Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, which was, you know, it would have been kind of neat to have like a light green wig. It really amplified the fact that it was a lichen wig.
Yeah.
But it was also kind of interesting because it kind of just looked like a fake blonde dye job. And yeah, so I had this like fake blonde dye job lichen wig and like white sort of tunic and a big sort of medallion necklace with lichens in it. And yeah, I kind of did performance art on the streets, being the lichen cult leader. I like to call attention when I can to, you know, when I'm using materials that aren't as ecological, but also I do try to kind of use that as a restriction that almost pushes me in certain creative directions.
Yeah, because artists talk a lot about if I need to have some sort of a box to then invent within and be creative within. And for you kind of trying to stick to sustainability, kind of ethical practices, helps make you creative?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also do some work with moss and other types of kind of natural scavenge type of things, right?
Totally, yeah. I like to cut away invasive plants. That's kind of a series I'm doing.
Yeah.
I kind of just cut a circle out of like a big, you know, bank of invasive broom or something.
And there's a lot of people who go out, especially in the South Island and around the island, and do these removals.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm very inspired by like the Green Team and HAT and a lot of these like local nonprofits that do restoration.
Yeah.
And
But you do a bit of art with it as you do it, right?
Like I've volunteered with them, so I know kind of the basics of how to do it properly, so you're not harming, you're actually helping. And yeah, I've sort of incorporated, I guess, ecosystem restoration, or at least the invasive removal aspect of it,
Yeah.
into some some art sort of installations outside. And I've also been transplanting mosses and other sort of ground
Yeah.
plants out of areas that are about to get logged or developed for industry,
Yeah.
and kind of transplanted them into a place where they'll survive,
Yeah.
and then have it be like a shape that is kind of aesthetic, as a way to like kind of
Draw attention.
draw
Yeah.
attention, show that it was a human intervention, and
Yeah.
have it be like more artistic. So I'm really interested in how to like blur the lines between like ecosystem restoration and stewardship with like a visual art practice.